Hello everybody, Eternal Flame here, and today I'm here to talk about a villain that I know a lot of people like on the channel, which that villain in particular is Kenjaku, a character who a lot of people generally believe should have been the final villain and is dead, and even some people that are still hoping that he's going to end up coming back in the future. But today I'm here to mainly talk about two things with Kenjaku, which the first thing I wanted to talk about is just my problem with Kenjaku as a villain. I do want to note this, I absolutely love Kenjaku as a villain. I think he's a really well-written villain. However, I wanted to use this video to explain A, why it makes a lot of sense that Kenjaku wasn't the final villain in my mind, and B, how would I change the story to make Kenjaku the final villain. Because I do think there is some potential for Kenjaku to be the final villain of JJK instead of Sukuna. The story just needs to be rewritten a little bit different and some things need to be changed, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. But without further ado, let's get straight into this. Also, there will be an announcement at the end of this video as well. So up first, before I even begin to talk about my problems with Kenjaku, I'm going to talk about why I really like Kenjaku and why a lot of people like Kenjaku as well. There are a couple of reasons to this. Number one, Kenjaku is nowhere near as simple as a character as Sukuna. While Sukuna does have some complexities to him, it's nowhere near as much as Kenjaku, mainly because Kenjaku is quite a complicated character, what his side even is, what his goals are. A lot of things about him is shrouded in mystery, which is something a lot of people love as well. Kenjaku is the orchestrator of the plot. Everything in the plot has happened because of Kenjaku. Even the main character being born happened because of Kenjaku, and that's something a lot of people love about him as well. The fact that he is a manipulator and that he is so good at a manipulator as well. There's also Kenjaku's goal that is rather unique and something about him I love too, which Kenjaku's goal is to create something that even he cannot control, doing this by optimizing curse energy, because it's very rare we see a villain that's main entire goal is to optimize the power system and create something new from it, in comparison to most other people who either want to purge the power system or use the power system to get what they want. Kenjaku just wants to basically mutate the power system and sees what happens, all because he's bored. Or at least we assume it's because he's bored because of everything that Kenjaku has said so far, and that's also something interesting about Kenjaku as well. We never know when Kenjaku is lying or telling the truth. Kenjaku is a character that's always shrouded in mystery, and we have to take all of his words with a grain of salt. Even now, we don't actually know what the merger even does, which has led to a lot of theories spawning about what the merger might even do, what Yuji's true purpose might be and his link to the merger. All of that good jazz has spawned because we don't know what the merger does, which links back to Kenjaku's character, and I don't think that's a bad thing because of how much talk has been spawned among the fandom because of that. However, this is where I'm going to get into my main problem now that I have with Kenjaku, which this main problem is mainly between Kenjaku and the main character of the story, Yuji Itadori, and the relationship that the two of them have, or should I say, the non-existent relationship that the two of them have. This is what told me for so long that Sukuna was going to be the final villain and not Kenjaku. The fact that Yuji Itadori and Kenjaku don't have a relationship at all, despite the fact that Kenjaku is Yuji's parent. Kenjaku made Yuji, and they don't have a relationship at all. This is even hinted at the beginning of the series to be important because that was what Wasuke probably wanted to tell Yuji, but that just ends up being a reveal, because everything about Kenjaku being Yuji's parent so far has amounted to only a few things. Which those few things are explaining why Yuji is capable of being a vessel, explaining Yuji's familial relationship to Sukuna and what's going to build up off of that, and allowing Yuji and Choso to be siblings. Other than that, the knowledge that Yuji is Kenjaku's child has really no effect on the plot so far. Now yes, of course, there is the potential of it having effects in the future since JJK is still ongoing at the current time of making this video, but right now this is still a pretty valid criticism, and even if this does end up having effects in the future, I think it would be too little too late for the next point I'm going to bring up with in their entire relationship. Which that is the fact Yuji doesn't care about Kenjaku at all, and that was the main indicator to me that Sukuna was going to be the final villain. Despite the fact that Yuji is aware of the fact that Kenjaku made him, that Yuji knows about the fact that his creator is apparently the most evil sorcerer in all of history, he doesn't care, he doesn't have a single thought about it, he doesn't question it at all. Now I'm not saying this doesn't make sense at all for Yuji's character. It makes a significant amount of sense considering the entire point of Shibuya was to put Yuji in that cog mentality and make himself think of himself as a cog. So that does make sense, and I understand the circumstance of why. However, that comes with the other issue, the fact that it ends up hurting the relationship more and more. This isn't a bad thing, but it's because of how the story is written. It is not written to be a centric story around Yuji and Kenjaku, even though there are very clear hints to it being that. Even though there are very clear hints and possibilities of it being to that, Yuji doesn't care enough for it to have as much value. Which just leaves Kenjaku as the excuse for why Yuji is so weird, as well as the connection between his brother that he has. Now, of course, for some plots, you don't actually need to have that much of a relationship between the main villain and the main character. Look at Naruto, for example. Naruto and Madara barely have any bit of a relationship, yet people still love Madara. However, that doesn't work anywhere near as much here, purely because there are clear attempts at trying to make a relationship between Yuji and Kenjaku. For example, making Kenjaku Yuji's mom, which only ultimately matters as an excuse for Yuji's potential to be equal to Sukuna to aid in the Sukuna plotline, as well as why Yuji is capable of being a vessel of Sukuna. Like, if the plot and story itself treats Yuji as nothing more than a pawn in Kenjaku's plan, and maybe something else to use with the merger being the Eye of the Storm of Curses, which we still don't ultimately know about, and Yuji himself doesn't really know about, the only thing that the plot really treats Yuji and Kenjaku's relationship as is as an excuse to make Yuji as powerful as he is, and to explain his connection to Sukuna. That is all Kenjaku and Yuji's relationship ultimately means, as well as the relationship between Choso, and that is the biggest issue with having Kenjaku as a main villain. If Sukuna was the one to die first and Kenjaku was the only one left, let's just say in a scenario where Gojo and Sukuna kill each other, because that's what everybody wanted that was on the Kenjaku side of Kenjaku being the main villain, they wanted Gojo and Sukuna to kill each other, so Kenjaku was stuck with the merger and having to fight all of the cast at once, any relationship and plot between Kenjaku and Yuji would end up feeling really empty because there hadn't been enough steps done to build it up, unlike Sukuna and Yuji. There would be more emotional buildup between Yuta and Kenjaku in that type of plotline than Yuji and Kenjaku. Of course, I know there are some people who think Yuta is still the main character and not Yuji, but that's clearly not the case with JJK up to this point now. I think that's kinda undeniable. Now, I will say I do have some other problems with Kenjaku, but they aren't anywhere near as massive. It's basically the amount of plot armor that Kenjaku has that I don't think enough people actually acknowledge, mainly because Kenjaku gets really lucky. This is something that I've recently discovered with my what ifs, which is how fragile the actual story of JJK is, because you'd be surprised how easy it is to just ruin Kenjaku's plan and make things go for the better. Now, I don't actually think that's a full-on problem. I actually kind of like the fragility of the story of JJK. It makes it really interesting to look at. However, I will say if you think this is a bad thing about Kenjaku, I do also think that's a valid criticism to say. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I do think it's a valid criticism nonetheless, that Kenjaku's plan really requires a lot of luck, but ultimately I think the main problem with Kenjaku as a final villain is the lack of a relationship with Yuji Itadori. A lot of people like Kenjaku as a final villain because they like the potential behind them that I think has led to several headcanon spawning about what Kenjaku would be like as a villain. However, while I will admit I think Kenjaku does have more interesting potential for a story than Sukuna does have, but in my opinion there's just not enough things in the story that has been spawned in order to form an interesting story between Yuji and Kenjaku currently. However, I don't just want to talk about my criticism and my problem with Kenjaku, I also want to talk about how I would fix this problem that I do have, mainly because I think giving out criticism without giving out solutions is just a bad thing to do usually. And it is to show that it's possible to write a story without this issue being present. And the way I have in mind is quite a simple way, which is just putting much more stock and effort into Yuji and Kenjaku's relationship. Now, I don't actually think that Gege planned out from the start for Kenjaku to be Yuji's parent, however, we have the benefit of hindsight that Gege didn't. So, while it's understandable why Gege didn't put as much effort and stock into it, considering Gege wasn't even certain if Kenjaku was going to be in Yuki's body or Geto's body at first, we have the benefit of hindsight and knowing how this story is supposed to play out, so we're going to plan accordingly. So it's pretty simple, include more moments of Kenjaku setting things up and being interested in Yuji's growth. For example, you could have Kenjaku watch the Junpei arc from a distance, including watching Yuji and Mahito's first fight, to see Yuji's growth and make comments on how both of them were growing faster than he expected, which hints that there might be even more between Kenjaku and Yuji connecting them than even we know right now. Or another way to help build up that relationship even more is when Yuji actually finds out that Kenjaku is his parent because of Choso, then he actually just begins to think a little bit more about it. And this is something that's kind of always irked me. The fact that Yuji didn't even think for a second about Kenjaku being his parent, despite the fact that it was revealed that him and Choso were siblings. Like, not even him second guessing or trying to ask Tengen what that could end up meaning has something that's always been on my mind, mainly because it just shows Yuji didn't really care at all about Kenjaku, and that was the way that Gege wanted to write the story. Especially considering what Yuji learned, which is his parent might be the person who is known as the most evil sorcerer of all time, as well as someone who was able to escape the grasps of time and appear in the future. Basically actually show Yuji thinking about the information that he gained and thinking back on it, thinking on what that could mean for him, thinking about if this explains why he was born with such inhuman amount of strengths and what else that this monster had created him for and why they created him. Like, you don't even need to give Kenjaku and Yuji that many interactions, in my opinion, for a good relationship to spawn between the two of them. You just need to have Kenjaku and Yuji active in each other's thoughts enough, or even like in passive thoughts, because that will help build it up. I'm not asking for Yuji to think about Kenjaku every single moment and every single passing day. I just want a few passing thoughts about Kenjaku, and that will end up helping to build this up massively. Like, these thoughts don't even need to be too big, just like small thoughts of why Yuji even exists, why was Yuji created by this mad scientist, and what else did this mad scientist intend to do when creating them. You don't even need to have Yuji search too big in the history. You can also, to help build up the bond, have Yuji actually ask about Kenjaku to Tengen. After all, while yes, they were in a rush because of the culling games, they weren't in that much of a rush. Besides, finding out more about Kenjaku is beneficial for everybody, because the more everybody learns about Kenjaku, the more they learn about the person who triggered the culling games, manipulated Mahito, and basically was responsible for everything happening. So the more they find out about him, the better it is for everybody, and it might actually help them prepare for the culling games even better. There are even smaller ideas that I got while I was recording this for ways to integrate the bond even more, and just to foreshadow this bond for an eventual confrontation in the future. One of those ways involved episode 1, where it's pretty heavily agreed among most people that Kenjaku is responsible for Yuji devouring that finger, while some people believe it's luck. However, I would just basically confirm that Kenjaku is the one behind it eventually. However, the way that I would confirm it is by putting Mimiko and Naniko in the same occult club as everybody else in order to bond with Yuji and become Yuji's friends at Kenjaku's request, so Kenjaku can eventually get Yuji to eat the finger. You can even have it so they're the ones who put the finger in, and it was Kenjaku who planted the seeds, rather than it all just being random accident. Then you can have it so when Choso beats Yuji in Shibuya, that Mimiko and Naniko recognize Yuji as one of their friends, basically confirming for everybody that Kenjaku had been manipulating everything in order to trigger this all happening. Which this adds another layer of manipulation to the plot, while at the same time helps to strengthen the bond between Yuji and Kenjaku even further, especially considering Mimiko and Naniko end up dying by Sukuna's hands because of the path that Kenjaku ended up putting them on. And that's just one plot point that I have come up with in order to help strengthen the bond and add more build-up for an eventual confrontation to make Kenjaku feel like that much more of a satisfying villain when he would face against Yuji, rather than what we have right now where Yuji and Kenjaku basically have a non-existent bond. Now you might be wondering, why am I putting so much focus onto the bond between Yuji and Kenjaku and developing it, other than of course build-up, and there's actually a pretty simple reason why I'm doing that. If Kenjaku is going to be the final villain, I want Yuji to hate Kenjaku more than he hates Sukuna. Mainly because I think that would very heavily benefit whatever final encounter that Yuji and Kenjaku would have in this weird alternate timeline, where Yuji's final villain is Kenjaku instead of Sukuna. Now, of course, there are a couple ways you can end up going to this as a final fight, with Kenjaku being the final fight, where either you can A, still have Yuji versus Sukuna and the entire Shinjuku showdown going the exact same, and then Yuji and everybody else who's left alive goes to fight Kenjaku rather than a Yuta finishing him off, or you can do a mutual death scenario between Sukuna and Gojo like a bunch of people actually were thinking were going to happen, where Gojo ends up taking out Sukuna and Sukuna ends up taking out Gojo. You could even have it so Megumi ends up helping out in the end, and that is ultimately how all three of their stories end up dying. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not as sure if I like this timeline as much more than I like the current timeline that we have, but at the same time, this is my way of how I would write Kenjaku as the final villain and not Sukuna as the final villain, because I don't think you can have Yuji have as much focus on Sukuna in comparison to Kenjaku. In my opinion, you can't have both timelines be true. You need to make Yuji care more about one instead of the other, and that would end up building that a lot more. There's a reason why a lot of people like the current Yuji versus Sukuna plot, and that's because of how much it has been built up. Basically, this entire video was just to go over why, if you were to do something similar with Yuji and Kenjaku, but just go much more in depth with how much that has been built up, it would end up making something that was much more satisfying as well. And because of how involved Kenjaku is in Yuji's life, it has a lot of potential for ways you can end up manipulating it to make Yuji actually hate them, but you just need to make it so they have actually a presence in Yuji's mind. I don't even think you need to hate them fully, but you just need to make Yuji think about Kenjaku often enough to want answers and for Kenjaku to be important to Yuji's life, beyond simply just acknowledging that they are his creator. However, that's how I would fix Kenjaku, and I'm really curious to see what you guys think of this, or if you have your own ways on how you would fix Kenjaku. And now I'm going to get into the announcement that I wanted to make. I'm going to be returning to school in about a month, so I'm probably going to be a little bit less busy with the channel in comparison to how I am normal, but I'm still going to try and upload actively as best as I can and upload as much content as I can to the best of my ability. finally, because JJK is probably going to end this year and I'm going to start running out of JJK content, while I am still going to continue doing JJK, I want to get other animes on the channel as well, so I'm going to probably end up starting to talk about other animes. However, comment down which anime you want me to talk about in the future on this channel. Also comment down what you would want me specifically to cover from those types of animes that you want me to cover. It could be things like what ifs, it could be things like actual explain, it could even be you asking how my opinion is on something that is written within that plot, and how I would rewrite it if I don't like it or not, to make it better. However, that's about everything that I have to say. Thank you for checking out my announcement. I hope you all have a good day. I'm gonna see you all later. Peace out. Bye.